Welcome everyone to London Tech Week and our panel on bridging the funding gap. So we're just going to start off with a round of introductions just so we know who we all are. So my name's Jude Orr. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm founder and CEO of a gaming company called Playmob, which is a tech for good platform. I'm also on the Global Entrepreneur Programme supporting international founders set up their businesses in the UK and get up and running in the UK. And if I could pass over to my co-chair, Liv.
Thank you, Jude. Hi, everyone. So my name is Liv Sibony. I am an entrepreneur. I run an organization called Sood Tribe, where we connect impactful entrepreneurs with angel investors. And I'm also a deal maker along with Jude, so helping companies from outside the UK looking to move into the UK to set up their operations here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Turner. I'm the co-founder of Angel Academy. We started in 2014 with a specific purpose of bringing more women into the world of angel investing. So only 9% of UK angel investors are women, although women collectively in this country own 48% of the net worth. So the barriers to women becoming angel investors are not financial. We help new investors learn to invest by working alongside experienced investors. And we are also investing all our funds into female founded tech startups. We're targeting sectors where we see high growth and exit potential. So these tend to be tech and IP based businesses. We're investing at late seed to Series A stage, and 70% of the investors in our community are females. Most of them are entrepreneurs or senior leaders themselves. And of course, like other angels, we're aiming for above average returns.
My name is Selma, and I'm a passionate entrepreneur myself. I'm the founder of a 1 Million Startup, which is a platform which is supporting SDG entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs that are working towards the Sustainable Development Goals. At the same time, I'm also the founder of the Austrian Angel Investors Association and also lead investor in Rising Tide, which is working on, which is a program where 99 women are investing together, women from across the globe investing together in Europe. So I have coming from both sides, from the entrepreneurial side and the investor side.
My name's Donna Cans, and I'm an assistant professor of organizational behavior at London Business School, where I teach leading teams and organizations, and I research sources of labor market inequality. The research that I perform is in part inspired by my personal experiences in investment banking, strategic consulting, and as co-founding CEO of a startup prior to joining academia.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Nadia Sood. I'm the CEO and founder of CreditEnable. We're a credit insights and technology solutions company. We basically act as a bridge between small to medium-sized enterprises and lenders. And we help those small to medium-sized enterprises access more affordable capital and help lenders lend in a more efficient and cost-effective manner. We operate the business in the UK and in India, and very excited to be part of this panel. Also, I have an investment background prior to starting this business, so I've seen things from both sides of the table, as have many of the other panelists.
I'm Laura McGee, founder and CEO of Diversia. We are a technology company that uses data and artificial intelligence to help organizations and especially investors become more inclusive. We've done work internationally for the G7, the G20, and investor cohorts, in particular North America and Europe. Super passionate and committed about how to, support private equity and venture capital firms, as well as, of course, government entities to allocate their capital in a way that is inclusive and ensures that all members of society have the opportunity to become entrepreneurs.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. I think we've got an incredible panel here, and we're covering entrepreneurs, investors, academia, and and the data side as well, which I think is really, really important. From my perspective, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm on my third business now as well, and have kind of had first-hand experience of fundraising as a female founder. So it's an area that's very close to my heart as well. So I'm looking forward to this being a discussion. We have questions that will be kind of more relevant for some of the panelists, but we want it to be a very kind of open, fluid conversation. So we want the panelists just, you know, if there's a question that we ask to a particular person, please feel free to comment or jump in. But Liv, I just want to kind of pass over to you just to say, you know, quickly about your kind of passion about being on the panel.
Absolutely, thank you. So yes, similar to a lot of people on the panel here, I have experience of both sides. So I raised investment for my first startup via Angel Academy through, thanks to Sarah Turner, who's on the panel here with us. And then I moved over to this the current startup that I'm running, which is really sitting on both sides as a broker, helping the entrepreneurs and the investors to connect. So really experiencing it from both sides of it, and having understood the challenges that any entrepreneur goes through to raise investment, but in particular women and certain types of businesses. I am extremely passionate about leveling the playing field, and I feel now is a great opportunity to really get our voices heard, because there's a lot of change going on at the moment. So I'm very excited to hear all our panelists today. Thanks again for joining.
Thanks, Liv. And yeah, I just have to say, it's really exciting that London Tech Week is happening. It's brilliant that it's still been able to happen online, even though we all can't be together physically. So to get started with the questions, I want to first turn our focus to kind of the UK perspective, and looking at some of our experiences of fundraising in the UK, looking at some of the challenges, some of the positives, some of the negatives, and how we can do things better. And Nadia, if I can direct the question to you first, and also if you're able to talk about some of the international experience or research that you've done, looking at you know, how we can better support female founders, or how female founders are being supported in other parts of the world, and what we can learn from this in the UK. So quite a long question, but if we could talk about your experience in the UK, but kind of more broader, what can we learn from the rest of the world, and what could we be doing in the UK to improve access to capital for founders?
Yeah, this is my second business in the UK. The first was an investment management firm, and now a fintech company. So I've been raising money from institutional investors, from individuals. And first of all, just to go to the size of the prize, I mean, last year, the HMRC produced the Rose Report, which actually quantifies the size of the prize as £250 billion of value that could be entered into the UK economy if women were able to start and scale businesses as fast as men. And what's also interesting to hear, though, is that last year, the British Business Bank also published research that said that about 89% of all VC deal value went to all male teams, and only 1% of VC deal value went to all female teams. So you can see that there's a massive potential opportunity and then a huge funding gap. What I think is very interesting in the UK, and then I'll touch a little bit on what's happening elsewhere, is that there are examples of things that the British government has done in the past that have been very successful in supporting entrepreneurs. These are things like the SEIS scheme and the EIS scheme, which are designed to help investors get into early stage businesses and reduce the risk around those. What I think could be the next really big leapfrog jump that the UK government should entertain is to set up a similar scheme, but focus solely on female founder and female founded businesses. This creates the incentive for capital to move into those businesses at the time that they need them most, and obviously lays the foundation for them to scale. So I think there's already a case here of something that's worked. It just hasn't been directed to women. Going more broadly outside of the UK, where we work, for example, in India, the government there has been quite progressive on certain fronts. So there are specific loan schemes that exist for women-founded businesses. These come with subsidized capital, also backed guarantees from the government to allow women to start businesses and scale them, and secure also debt capital into their businesses at more attractive rates. Likewise, during COVID, what some interesting things the government did
was they targeted stimulus packages into sectors that had high employment rates for women. So for example, textile sector in India employs about 95% women employees. They wanted to make sure that they weren't all furloughed and that the sector didn't collapse. And obviously the impact on families was going to be huge. So they actually pumped stimulus money into that sector, specifically to ensure that women, and created funds and things like that to help women remain employed. So I think there's some very specific interventions that governments can take to actually both deploy private commercial capital, or help stimulate the deployment of that private commercial capital into women-founded businesses, but also ensure that stimulus and debt packages get into those businesses as well. And sometimes that's also about providing financial education assistance along with those to help women get the confidence they need to then go to the bank and make the first loan application, for example. So these are some of the things I think would be quite groundbreaking if they were implemented here, and they definitely have had positive results elsewhere.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nadia. Sarah, I just want to, sorry, we may jump around on some of the questions, but I just wanted to get your feedback on Nadia's suggestions, or get your thoughts on what's happening in the UK, or what could happen in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, really interesting that Nadia referenced EIS and SEIS, because they've been, they're incredibly generous tax breaks, and they've been very effective at getting individuals to risk some of their own private capital in early stage businesses. The challenge that we've seen from where we sit is that this message hasn't reached as many women as it has men. So men are taking advantage of those tax breaks, but women aren't. So the prize that I'm looking at, I think angel investment is already £2 billion a year. It's by far the largest source of early stage investment in the UK, but women are as yet relatively untouched. It's an untouched market. So the prize that I'm looking at is making more women aware of the EIS and the SEIS benefits. And then our own research and other people's research shows that when you get women investing, they're 3 or 4 times more likely than men to back female founders. So, you know, we're looking at it from a kind of a demand side rather than supply side. But I think actually the EIS and SEIS schemes work quite well as they are. I'm not sure how they could be changed specifically to target women, because at the moment they're eligible for all businesses.
And Sarah, actually, sorry, just to follow on from that, Nadia had also mentioned the Rose Review, which had identified a number of challenges. Do you see anything? So if you don't think the SEIS can be particularly adapted any more generous for women, is there anything you see in the Rose Review that we can look to address in order to support more female-founded businesses?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to say that I didn't think the SEIS scheme couldn't be adapted. I'd just be keen to understand what Nadia was suggesting. So it's a question rather than a statement. Yeah, I mean, lots of positive initiatives mentioned in the Rose Review, but all very much focused on the supply side, the supply of entrepreneurs. I'd actually take a little bit of a different view, that I think that actually 1/3 of all businesses now, the Rose Review quotes as being set up by women. I think it's actually a very positive statistic. Where I see the challenges are women scaling their businesses and not even necessarily getting the first round of capital, but the follow-on capital after that. So I think, you know, limited resources have got to be deployed at where the real pain point is. So I would say less at startup stage, now more at scale-up stage, please.
Yeah, I'd love to build on 2 points. I think, you know, the first one around really where does the problem lie? And I think there's a lot of focus at the front end of the pipeline, getting women to start businesses, and, you know, to the earlier point, less focus on scaling them up. And so we saw a trend in North America where, as one example, 17% of small businesses were started by women, and only 7% of companies with more than 500 employees were run by women. So of course, you know, the ideal scenario is 50-50 the whole way through. But ultimately, what we discovered is we'd been pouring way too much time, energy, and resources at the front end, and ultimately losing entrepreneurs along the way. And so I think definitely focusing on what are the levers available to the government to scale up. women entrepreneurs, and I would add other underrepresented founders as well. And so some of the things that have worked well in our scan globally, number one is procurement. So I think the US, shining example of some things, and in terms of supporting women entrepreneurs, they have been doing this fairly effectively for the past 20 years. And so what they did is they allocated a percentage of procurement dollars specifically for female-run businesses. And I think the second lever here, this cannot be, in my view, purely government-driven. The majority of the capital flowing throughout the ecosystem is deployed by the private sector. And I think there's a lot that the government can do to role model, to convene, to engage the private sector in setting targets and really measuring progress towards the equal allocation of capital. And so I think one example would be an effort that we're actually co-leading with Diversity VC to improve the flow of capital to underrepresented founders. And so we've been working with the Canadian government as well as the UK government to really get the word out and build the business case for investors to really take this on as their cause as well. And I think the final thing here, and what really truly underlines all of these efforts, is the importance of data. And so I really loved Nadia's point around, the British Business Bank has taken a step by collecting data in the allocation of the Future Fund. But it's what do you do with that data once you have it? So I think, the work that we're doing, for example, with the Business Development Bank of Canada is analyzing how and they're the biggest LP in Canada. They are, like the British Business Bank, an entity of government, really looking at all stages of that pipeline. Who is receiving the funds? What do those companies look like? Beyond simply who are they owned by, how inclusive are they? And using that data baseline to set targets to ensure that capital is allocated increasingly to underrepresented groups.
The idea of a specially sort of tailored program called WSEIS and WEIS, which is really tailored to women entrepreneurs in a more narrow sense. So looking at what are the impediments to them even getting into the system in the first place. Some of it has to do with the complexity of actually getting the accreditation that you need, which isn't that straightforward. So support around that, for example, to incentivize women to actually apply. And then perhaps looking at additional benefits for the earlier stage investments, especially in the EIS scheme itself, to incentivize, for example, networks of individual investors or angel investors to come in more. Again, since women are backing those women as they're scaling, if they get in early and then they have a greater incentive to do so, then likelihood is they're going to continue following on. So back to Sarah's point that you would be stimulating that pipeline and that follow through investment. So those are the sort of ideas that I had around maybe creating a tailored version of that to actually help stimulate investment into women-owned businesses.
Thanks, Nadia. Selma, I was wondering if we could bring you in actually to comment on what that looks like for you from the international perspective.
One thing I can definitely second is the need for more female investors. If we want to have more female entrepreneurs and more investments into female entrepreneurs, we definitely need more female investors. And I look at it from a perspective also, for example, when we started in Austria, it was a very a new market, basically business angels as such. So we really had to start from scratch. And there were a few things that we did that were helpful to increase the number of business angels, which could be used then in general and can be used to increase the number of female business angels and investors. So if you want, so first thing, having more female investors in general. Second thing that the government can do is definitely to work on the or that we have seen that works is really working on this role modeling. We know that what you see, you can be. So when you see role models, when you see women that have successfully invested, if they get the visibility, and if you have governments and media investing in media campaigns, then you can see that. And that is extremely important because what a lot of this picture and the idea of this, young entrepreneurs has started with Mark Zuckerberg and his studio on Wall Street. And we need these pictures to be spread around the world of women that are visible, that are on the cover pages because they are investing into startups and making money and also doing some good work with that. I think, in general, is that something that is very important for the majority of women that I know, and more men. We see a trend, we see definitely a change that is happening in investment where people who are investing into startups really want to see impact done with that. So the notion of just, having money that is invested simply and purely for the purpose of making more money is kind of losing in comparison to the investing money to create something, a benefit, a solution that at the end of the day then makes money. So we see the rise of impact investing, SDG investing, and all of these different things that are happening. And women are more inclined to look at this. And one thing that we know is that, we always talk about women are kind of risk averse, and I just like to think that they are risk aware. And I wish more male investors would be more risk aware and will be not kind of embracing risk as much as they do. So we see a lot of companies also. As an investor, you see a lot of companies that have been invested tons of money, but at the end, none of this is happening. It's purely just driven by investments, but not really by the benefit and the purpose or the benefit to the clients at the end of the day. So, you see a lot of money pouring into startups that are hip and cool, because at the moment it is hip and cool to be also a business angel or in VC or investor into startups, but that don't really have a chance of succeeding. So the first one is increasing the number of business angels, female business angels. The second one is this role model visibility media campaign. And the third one is, of course, investing into all of these acceleration programs. We have good examples, for example, in Austria, where the existing programs of grants and loans and investments from the government, they have just an additional benefit if there is a woman on the founding team or in the management. So it's the same scheme, but it just has a small little benefit or small or larger benefit. So you don't create something that is especially for women, but you say if you're a woman, you get more. And we've seen some very good EU funds that were designated for women. And when you have the call, which is clearly, calling for women entrepreneurs to apply to that, that is, of course, that much more successful. There's a lot of work that we still need to do on the empowerment side, but that's another story. But I believe very strongly this role modeling, campaigning, visibility makes a lot of difference. If we had some really big names in the in the industry or in the sector or in the society, saying this is cool and I want to do it, then you will have more women also kind of think about it at least. But we have had a lot of good examples of really networks supported also by ministries or events where women meet and discuss it and talk about. We know that many women are mentors. They are supporting startups, but not necessarily in a professional manner. And if we can professionalize that relationship, I'm talking now in this early stage, pre-seed, seed investing, and really kind of a business angel investing. It's about professionalizing that relationship, and then later on really looking at the governments to showcase the good examples. We know that works.
I think that's a really interesting point, Selma, and I think it's the kind of having role models to make it aspirational and cool. But then also I think another important point to add to that is role models to show how accessible it can be to be an entrepreneur and to be an investor. I mean, obviously it once you're in, it's hard work, and we need to kind of reiterate that as well. But it's I think it's shown that anyone can be an entrepreneur if they put their mind to it. It kind of reminds me of property. I
just wanted to give we have another story. We have the New Zealand Prime Minister when she was there in the UN, breastfeeding her baby and representing New Zealand. But what she said in one of the interviews, she said, I'm not the first female prime minister of this country. There were others before me. So for me, that's nothing new. I just thought it was possible. I never thought it is something special. And that's exactly what I'm talking about is, when you see somebody who's doing it and is successful, then you think, oh, okay, I can do that. No problem. So I believe in that very strongly.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's a great example. I mean, the example I had in my head was more around kind of thinking about property and thinking, decades and decades ago, it was government and companies or commercial that, were creating housing and owning houses, whereas, individuals now have, portfolios of houses that they rent out or sell. And people it becomes a job, to manage your own property portfolio. So it can be the same with companies and investments. And I think it's just making people aware that it can be a career, it's a career path, and it's an option, and to show how it's done I think is really important. So I love this idea of role modeling. Sorry, I just wanted to interject on that one.
And could I just jump in with a suggestion? I think role modeling's great, but I think it's got to be in the context of increased financial literacy as well. We have got a kind of quite widespread problem amongst all generations, this kind of risk aversion. And I think part of it is the government's fault. And in their attempts to protect us with all this regulation, the way they communicate risk is not as something to be managed, but something to be avoided. So, it doesn't help the investor side. So I think what we've got to do is start young with people and educate them to have a sensible approach to risk. And, frankly, if you're putting your money in a savings account, it's declining in value as we speak. So, how can people use their money more productively to make more money, but also to achieve social impact or whatever it is they want to achieve. So I think there's, a much wider education piece around finance and investing in general. And this is not just about angel investing, it's everything. Young people are terrified of risk.
Thanks, everyone. And Dana, I'm really curious to know what that looks like from the academic perspective. I'm wondering if you've seen any key themes come out of the data and any recommendations you have based on your research.
Sure, thanks. A lot of what everybody has said, I would definitely echo, and I really liked hearing about, this role modeling concept of reshaping the archetype of what a successful founding CEO looks and sounds and feels like, because those representations are deeply ingrained and at the heart of these stereotypes. And I would say the balance of scholarly and also practitioner research, such as the work that Nadia mentioned earlier, at the intersection of gender and entrepreneurship, indicates that male and female-led ventures do in fact achieve significantly different outcomes, and that these differences are in part attributable to bias on the part of investors because of the different expectations that investors have for men versus women in these leadership roles. And that harkens back to the idea of role modeling. While raising funding for my own startup about 10 years or so ago, I noticed that investors had been asking me a different set of questions than my male co-founder, where I got questions about everything that could go wrong to induce investor losses, while he was getting asked about how we were going to maximize investor gains. So years later, when I got into academia, I decided to explore these differences as part of my PhD dissertation at Columbia that culminated in recent research my colleagues and I published. And so we found that investor questions do in fact differ along this dimension of gain versus loss framing, whereby male entrepreneurs are more likely to be asked promotion questions pertaining to this domain of gains. So in other words, questions around hopes, accomplishments, and advancement considerations, while female entrepreneurs are more likely to be asked prevention questions concerned with the domain of losses, so those related to safety, responsibility, and security needs. So across both our field and experimental studies, we found that investors allocated significantly more funding to those startups that are asked predominantly promotion over prevention questions when accounting for key factors that can affect their funding outcomes. What was interesting was that those entrepreneurs, in general, entrepreneurs are likely to respond in kind to the questions that they get. So this is likely to create a disadvantage when you're getting asked predominantly from prevention-focused questions. So what's surprising is that those who manage to switch focus, responding to a prevention question with a promotion response, can raise significantly higher amounts of funding for their startups. And so that means responding to a question about defending your market share by highlighting the size and growth potential of the entire pie rather than how you merely plan to protect your sliver of that pie. When I talk about recommendations that our research points to, one of the really interesting parts of the research was that we were able to confirm female founders do not in any way do anything wrong in terms of how they're representing themselves and their startups to prospective investors. And in fact, they actually present with higher degrees of promotion wording, so words around gains, than their male counterparts, although the differences aren't significant. So they're not doing anything differently to induce these questions that place them at a disadvantage. It really goes back to these deeply ingrained stereotypes that some of us were alluding to earlier. So first and foremost, I think the research overall is pointing to the fact that investors have an opportunity to confront these biases in their decision-making processes and infuse greater rationality into those processes by consistently framing their questions to candidates regardless of gender and other demographic, socioeconomic, et cetera, characteristics. So being able to have this framework to work off of, and in general, taking a step back and making sure that they're doing things to reform their processes from screening through decision making and then oversight as well of their portfolios, so that they can give everybody in those portfolios, regardless of the leadership being male or female led, an equal chance of not only entering into their portfolio but surviving and also thriving along the way. And a lot of us talked about scaling and being able to nurture those startups so that they're able to scale properly and achieve critical mass and other milestones.
But I just want to ask a quick question as well. I mean, do you think it's also a case of educating investors more? I mean, there's the unconscious bias piece, and Laura, I'd love to get more of your thoughts on that. But there's, how do we educate more investors to ask the right questions?
Yeah, I think there's been a confluence of factors that has led to investors being in a place where they recognize the fact that there is both implicit and explicit bias that has been plaguing the industry. So I myself have been really pleasantly surprised by the degree of proactivity on the part of investors to integrate research-driven training into reforming their best practices of late. I would say that the tides have turned for the positive on that front within the past maybe 6 to 12 months. So I'm hopeful that more of these funds will, in fact, turn their attention to reforming best practices and conducting training. It's about making sure that they have these processes and procedures in place, and they're not just saying, hey, you know what, we are going with reckless abandon and just going with our gut feel, and we've got 30 years of experience under our belts, so we can make a decision on the fly, and we don't need a framework for questions that we ask. We don't need a procedure for how we do things. And I think that's the way a lot of these funds have operated in the past. But I do, as I said, see some signs of hopeful change.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dana. Yeah, sorry, Laura, I just want to ask that quick question, but I think that's the perfect kind of segue for you to, it'd be great to hear a bit more from you.
So building on Dana's really fantastic research, so that was a kind of cornerstone insight in work that we led for the Trump-Trudeau Council for Advancement of Women. And so that investor bias around how founders are evaluated was absolutely critical. And how we took that forward in terms of, what can the government, but also the private sector do in the face of these biases. Kind of no surprise given the audience, but for us, it really came down to data and transparency. And so, not a knock on investors, but people generally are remarkably resistant to their own bias. But what we found was effective is if you can analyze the decisions that investors make on a kind of an individual basis and really benchmark the outcomes to their peers, that really tends to be what kind of triggers the light bulb moment. So, for example, what I mean by that is, one thing that we've done is analyze portfolio composition across different types of venture capital and private equity firms. And, while we can start with the data that you are likely asking different questions, what really resonates is if we can say, look, you have half as much capital allocated on a relative basis to female-founded companies as your direct peers. It's really that insight that kind of confirms for them, okay, we really gotta invest in this, especially given that female-founded companies, as many have pointed out, really do tend to outperform. So I think it's a combination of that initial awareness, the confluence of factors, the initial awareness, the data to support that bias exists. And then I really do think there's something around that competitive spirit. The investment industry, like many, is influenced by peer pressure. So kind of consistently raising the bar through that competitive spirit, I think we've seen that really drive results.
Yeah, I wanted to just say one thing back to thank you, Laura, for all of that. And I'm so glad to hear that the research was helpful. And from an academic perspective, to piggyback on what you were saying, the biggest challenge for us is to gain access to individual level data, and particularly these rich data points, including demographic, socioeconomic, and geographic data on this larger scale so that we can document what is going on, taking this data-driven approach from the academic standpoint. And in terms of moving beyond the descriptive to perform research that is not only descriptive, but also prescriptive, we need partners willing to work with researchers on randomized controlled trials, or RCTs for short, to test interventions on male versus female-led venture teams and see what is working and for whom. So that's from our standpoint, from the academic standpoint, that is what we would love to see as our ideal future.
Just in terms of, on the other end of the system as well, I think women need to be trained to understand how to have conversations with investors given the biases that are there. Myself, I was always working in predominantly male-dominated industries. I ran a private equity fund earlier that invested only in the renewable energy sector, and I was literally the only woman handling a portfolio like that globally. With my board, I always started the conversation with, here are the risks. Let's talk about those, get those out of the way, and let's get into the big, exciting stuff afterwards. But just confronting that bias head on at the beginning and saying, I understand you're going to want to talk to me about these. I've already covered them, and now we're going to move into the big opportunity. Just flipping things around, but I think women need to be practically trained on how to do that, and to come into the conversation clearly understanding what the biases are going to be, and then use the biases to their advantage as well. So it's, on the one hand, we definitely have to get the data together, and we definitely need to publish the research, and we definitely need to make investors aware, and we definitely need to try to work with investors, but we also need to work with entrepreneurs to help them in today's reality deal with that bias that still is very heavily present. So I think that sort of specific targeted training, going hand in hand with the data collection and analysis that many of you are doing is equally critical. And back to your point, Salma, about role modeling, right? If you can role model, if you can show the entrepreneur how to have the conversation to get them to success, then it becomes easier as well.
Sarah, I know you spend a lot of time supporting both the entrepreneurs and the investors to level the playing field. What kind of training do you give to both sides of the party, and have you seen that help with any change in the investment amounts that go through?
Well, absolutely. I think there's education required on both sides. So, you know, if for investors, it's a process. There's a set of skills and techniques that you need to learn in order to become comfortable at making investments. And just a nod to Dana as well, we use her promotion versus prevention questions as a part of our education when we're talking to investors. So something to be aware of, I think, both men and women. And then on the entrepreneur side, I think absolutely, and not just women, but men, you need to understand what investors are looking for. And ultimately, it's only going to be a small proportion of all businesses that attract equity investment. And it's, you know, people are looking for specific businesses that are going to be often technology based, so they're able to scale aggressively and quickly. But I think, you know, there are certain aspects that we as female investors are particularly motivated by, because we want to see those companies growing in the right way, not breaking things and acting horribly on their way up, only to fail later on. But and also, you know, motivated by doing something, as Selman said, you know, beyond just delivering financial return to investors. Of course, that's important part of being a sustainable business, but achieving some impact as well.
I just want to change topic slightly and turn to the pandemic, which has obviously impacted us all and everyone around the world. But you know, with the pandemic, you know, it's brought about some new benefits, such as, you know, remote working, being able to work from home, and there's more challenges obviously as well. Things like, you know, the responsibility of childcare for women, less internet access for those on lower income. But how do you see government being able to help people leverage some of the benefits, and what can they do to reduce the challenges? And that's a question for everyone. So anybody who wants to kick this one off, please feel free to start talking.
I was just going to jump in and say, I just think it's fantastically important to get kids back to school in September, because that has had a devastating effect on lots of women I know, and they're relatively lucky off. But I think the most disadvantaged children are being the most severely affected by that as well. They're missing out not just on education, but socialization and other opportunities. So that's a priority for me.
I think there's also a huge opportunity to really focus on girls' education and upskilling on technology. I mean, it's become obvious, if it wasn't before, that if you're not part of the digital economy and you're not digitally integrated, you're going to have bigger and bigger gaps occurring in the world. And we've seen in India, you know, just complete behavior change of businesses that were completely offline before, that have suddenly have had to go online, because that's the only way they're going to survive. And I think if government can really take this as an opportunity to focus on helping girls get into the technology space, get upskilled in terms of their digital and science and STEM education, it's going to do a huge service to the society as well, and to them. And I think, you know, the impetus is here now to really focus on that, especially for women and girls.
What Sarah just said in terms of that the kids need to go back to school because of the kids, but it is also really the issue with women and education that we have. And one thing that we've seen was not directly related to women, but was really helpful, was grants that were given to create your home offices. So that you can buy all the equipment and all of that, because we've seen that many of the women simply didn't have that, and didn't have their own personal equipment to start their own business and to change that. And now, you know, having the possibility to get a grant and to do that, you know, it doesn't have to be much. You don't need much, but still it is a cost that you need to invest. That was something that was really helpful to start, or to have the opportunity there. And also certainly some available, you know, acceleration or teaching on how to use in the best way the online possibilities. So I don't mean like, you know, talking on Microsoft and having a video conference, but really, how do you build a business? How do you start? And really discussing what we have invested in performance of entrepreneurs, of building creative business models and sustainable business models. Now, how do you change that and still create sustainable business models, but online or in a blended form, is something that you need help with. I mean, to me, many of these things seem very logical and easy, and what's the big deal? You do this and you do that, but for many women across the world, this is a big issue. I mean, I had one opportunity to work in the townships in South Africa in Cape Town, and I was talking to this woman, and she was starting her business, and it never occurred to her that she would need a website and that she could sell online. So, I mean, it really depends on what level are we talking about. If we're talking about the UK, it's definitely different, but even there we have differences, I'm sure. But if we talk about women across the world, it's really taking a look at what the stage is and, how many women do support in coming out of that situation where they're fully dependent. So it is a combination of these factors, and it definitely has changed. But I do believe that for many women, this is the opportunity. You don't have to go to the evening events and networking. You can network in a different manner. We know that was one of the big issues. You can do a lot of these things at times when it fits you and your personal schedule. And I would like to really, empower that and that we enable more women to really use it to their own benefit and their own schedule.
Do you, and I'm probably most people on the panel can contribute to this, have any specific places, recommendations where people can find resources or networks to join to help female founders?
I think, in my view, there is absolutely no greater threat to equality and inclusion than the economic response to this pandemic. And that's not a knock to the response, but I think it is a reality. So we kind of early on did some back of the envelope analysis and found that in a do nothing scenario, given the sector concentration of women-led businesses, we can expect to see a drop within the top 50 global economies in the share of women-owned business from about 23% to 10% of businesses across those top 50 economies. And so the idea here is women are more likely to own businesses in hospitality, tourism, services, et cetera, that have been really disproportionately affected and ultimately will fail faster as a result. So what does this mean for government? I think absolutely the pandemic response needs to acknowledge that reality, and the response, heretofore needs to incorporate measures to promote inclusion. And so I think one really great place to start is for funds like the British Business Bank, for example, to really sit down and look at how businesses are performing, what is their composition, and how can they better allocate and more fairly allocate capital to support those businesses throughout the response.
I think, I want to just echo some of the things that were said already, and that's the importance of having targeted government funds that are specifically allocated to fundraise for these marginalized groups, including women. So necessary, especially at this time. Otherwise, we're liable to exacerbate these inequalities by, say, focusing on preventing startups that have already raised funding from going belly up, since we know that the pool of already funded startups and some of these larger startups is over-indexed for wealthy white men, for instance. And I think it comes down to a holistic three-pronged approach, really, that not only offers resources to obtain financial capital, but also human capital that many of us have been mentioning in different ways, arming founders with technical skills, with financial and investment-oriented literacy, and with social capital, connecting those founders in beneficial ways to amplify their messages at this really important time, especially connecting with industry leaders in these areas, such as those that Laura mentioned. We know across hospitality, tourism, et cetera, that are over-indexing for female-led businesses. And that includes thinking more deeply about the specific needs of women, since we know, as you mentioned earlier, that they're bearing this disproportionate burden of care duties in their households, and they require this additional support during this difficult time.
Thank you, Dana. And I think, yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I think the going back to school part is so important, I think, for the kids and for the parents, but also, yeah, the what do you do for the kids who are not quite school age? So kind of talking from personal experience, I've got a 20-month-old, and luckily we've got a nanny who she wasn't interacting with other people. We weren't interacting with other people. So during lockdown, we were both happy for her to still come and cover 4 days a week for us. It would have been a completely different story if she hadn't. I don't know what we would have done, because we were both working full time. If you're running your business, you have to be on it. I mean, I dread to think what our days would have been like. But I had a number of friends who did have to work at home, and had younger kids, and more than one as well. And I'm still trying to think about what can be done to make things easier for them. And I think, there was situations where friends had colleagues who were furloughed, and so it meant that their workload had doubled because people had been furloughed. But then they had their younger kids and homeschooling, and it's such a juggle. But I guess it's a situation that we've never had to deal with before. So
you were just saying a point where it is really kind of something that governments can look with the companies, or support companies that they support their employees. Doesn't matter, female and male, but of course we know it's mostly female, but still that the government gives support to the companies that they can give to their employees so that they can have more time. So if you usually work 8 hours, for a company, that you can, during that time you work 6 hours or something like that, and still get the same salary for a certain period of time while we are still on lockdown and things like that. So to give some space, and it goes, in a scale, it goes down to the people so that they can have more time to juggle and manage. Because I mean, you have to afford the nanny, so you have to have the job to have that. So it's really kind of looking at which level are we looking at, and what stage. But these are things also that can be done.
I think that's a great suggestion.
I think also just picking up on one of the points Laura made about the longevity of the interventions, and we sort of have to think of this pandemic as a marathon. It's not that tomorrow morning there's going to be a cure and everything is going to go back to normal. And those sectors which are overly represented by women, which have been the hardest hit, those entrepreneurs and those business people are going to need to learn how to pivot their business, or they're going to have to exit that sector and do something completely different. And so government thinking also about, upskilling programs, training programs, education programs around, because some of them will be able to pivot from what they were doing and be creative about it. Some just will not be. And it'll just be a sad, hard reality that they'll have to do something else. So what do they then do if they've been running a small restaurant for 20 years? What's the next step for them? And really thinking about those training programs for women is going to be super important, especially around digital education and getting them integrated into the society if they have to do something else.
Have any of you seen good examples of businesses that have done an impressive pivot to their benefit in the pandemic?
I think we did something in Canada where one of the universities basically identified, I think, about 10 success stories of women who successfully pivoted after COVID took hold. So some really cool success stories around manufacturers and clothing manufacturers pivoting to masks, for example. But I think the idea of identifying and highlighting and promoting those success stories was really effective, because I think it sparked, to our early discussion around role modeling, it sparked a lot of entrepreneurs to think, I can do this too, and in fact, I should be doing this.
So we've got some great case studies from our portfolio. So one business that's a cancer diagnostics business, but they had several clinical trials running, and all trials have been closed down because monitors can't go into hospitals and things. So they pivoted to developing some software to enable the remote monitoring of clinical trials, which they're then selling on a SaaS business model. So that's keeping their business going while the main diagnostic business is just on hold until they they hear more.
I'm just wondering if anyone can point the audience to helpful resources for female entrepreneurs. Is there sort of a couple of places you would send people to help them build their businesses?
I wasn't going to mention anything specific, but I mean, there are so many networks out there. Several of the founders we've invested in are running their own female founder WhatsApp groups and things like that. So, you know, find one that's a fit for you. There are tribes of female investors, but I was also going to say, don't just limit your conversations to women. We've got to work alongside men, and men may invest in our businesses. So let's talk to them as well.
So on the digital front, if you want to get your business digital and it's been offline, both Facebook and Google actually produce really great resources for entrepreneurs on how to do that. And you can take a digital marketing course on Google for free that helps you understand the basics of doing that. So those are actually quite helpful. You can do them at your own pace and you don't have to pay. And they're obviously produced by two of the biggest advertisers in the world. So they're quite good standard. And for female entrepreneurs who are in the technology sector, I highly recommend talking to Nadia, which is one of my investors. It's a coalition of women and men from Silicon Valley to London to India that invest in high growth technology companies that are founded by or have a woman in the C-suite. And they have around 50% of their investors are men and 50% are women. And they create a huge network of advisory resources for you as well. So that's a great place to go if you're trying to raise money. And like Sarah was saying, there are lots of female founder networks and other networks that promote women getting to talk to each other and share experiences. There's also a great network called Ada's List for women who work in the technology sector, and that can be very broad. You don't have to be a coder to be part of that. It operates globally, and people share all sorts of things there. They share hiring opportunities, they share business opportunities, they coach and mentor each other. It's a really great network also that I'm part of.
So slightly different answer, but to kind of finding resources, I'm a big believer in, your network is your net worth. And I think one of the best things an entrepreneur can do in any sector is really build that network of sponsors and mentors. And especially, in a time like today, I think you'll need not only, curated advice, but also introductions to really help you pivot or help you grow. So I think some really great suggestions have already been made. My kind of very tactical process is reach out to 2 or 3 people who are peers or even friends of friends who you think have kind of cracked the code. And don't be afraid to ask for introductions. So I think, finding those connectors and really using those contacts to put you in front of people who could be helpful and having a lot of, high quality chats is one of the best things you could do right now, in my view.
We are discussing here, obviously, about startups. That means not just regular entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurs that need really money and need investors. But I've seen many great cases of great businesses that did not need investors at the early stage. And instead of focusing on finding investors, they should focus on the best investor possible, which is a paying client. And I would like to urge all entrepreneurs to go first towards paying clients if possible, and then to look after investors if that's needed to grow. That's the first thing. Decide if you need an investor or not. The second thing, if you need an investor, there are so many different places and cases where you can go. It really depends where you are and what access do you have. But for one thing for sure, do not go to the classical things, and just because an investor is a popular or famous, you do not need to have that investor. There's a beautiful story of Peter Diamandis, who started the X Space and X Prize, and he was already a big entrepreneur and before at the time, and he has approached 100 investors, and none of them wanted to give him money until he found a woman, Miss Ansari, who invested into his space project. So it is really finding the right investor for the right project. So think about it, and if that person is across the world, you're in Japan and that person is in the Silicon Valley, or South Africa and Ireland, I don't care. Find the best investor for what you are doing, not necessarily the most popular and the most famous one. And third, it's really most important is you are definitely enough. You do not need to go to 1,000 classes and learn another 1,000 things. Just trust yourself. Just go for it. Learn on the go, and you'll be just fine.
Just to add to what Selma was saying about kind of getting customers rather than investment. Yes, I think it's a classic mistake a lot of entrepreneurs make, is they think they need to get investment first, but actually build the value of your company. Your company will be more valuable if you can create some revenues, and you'll have far more leverage in your conversations with investors if you have customers, paying customers ideally.
Revenue is the cheapest form of cash into your business, isn't it?
Exactly.
Sometimes we forget about that, but I mean, because this panel is called Bridging the Gap, I just wanted to, and I think this is a perfect segue into this question. Just if you've got like a top tip to give to those who may be thinking about investment or going through investment right now, but I think thinking about your customers is a great tip to give. But if anybody else has got any other tips that they want to share with the audience.
So just to second something that Selma said earlier, finding the right investor and really thinking carefully about that is so important. I've had the benefit of a couple of investors actually who invested in my business during COVID and who've been actively working with me. We said, let's do a 90-day plan for how we leapfrog the business because of COVID. And they've been systematically working with me. And what they brought to the table was much more than just money. Obviously, you need the money, but they also brought a skill set that I needed at the time that we didn't have in the business, and the experience of building very large businesses from scratch and going through all the different stages. And that's been hugely valuable. Like, I can't even put a price on how valuable that's been for us. So trying to find investors who can also bring expertise to the table beyond just capital is really critical, and they can really help you fundamentally transform what you're doing because of their own experiences, and also because of the failures that they've gone through, that you don't have to repeat those failures. You can make your own new ones, which you will for sure, but you generally don't have to make theirs, because they'll give you the benefit of learning from that.
That's a great tip, Nadia. Thank you for that. Laura, Ghana, do you have any a tip that you want to end on before we close off the panel?
Like I said earlier, I'm a big believer in what gets measured gets done. And I think now is a really great time to collect that data, set a baseline for how we support women and underrepresented founders. And really, I mean, if this pandemic has taught us nothing, it's that we can be way bolder than we thought we could. And so I would use that baseline to set really aggressive targets and really hold anyone accountable for meeting them. I think it's, works in other areas of business. It should work here as well.
Nadia actually articulated it really nicely. And I was going to just say that it's about investors behaving as not only as financial investors, but as strategic partners, helping female entrepreneurs get access to all types of resources, acting as lead investor to help put a round together, jointly co-setting near and long-term milestones for growth and impact in tandem with the founders, rounding out their founding teams where there are holes, onboarding advisors, connecting them to employees and to hosting providers and landlords and anchor clients and revenue sharing partners and also potential acquirers if and when that makes sense. So it just echoes and underscores what's already been said, essentially.
Thanks, Dana. And so thank you so much to everybody. I think this has been such a brilliant panel. I think there's probably tons more we can talk about, but our time is almost up. So I think just some of the recommendations that have come out, I hope are going to be listened to and potentially looked at to be implemented. But I love this idea of looking at more women supported packages through government. The WEIS, WSCIS scheme would be brilliant. I think just a way to stimulate the pipeline, invest in more women, and create more female investors would be fantastic. Role modeling, I think, was a big topic, and I think if we can do more role modeling to inspire people to be investors and to be entrepreneurs, it's a great idea. Impact investing as a way to attract more female investors. Looking at increase in financial literacy from a young age, I think that's crucial. How women are risk aware, and I love that phrase as well. So how do we make sure we're young people are not becoming risk averse but risk aware, and still able to take risks. I love this idea about how to training women on how to talk to investors and the language that's used, using gains language, not loss or risk language. So I'll be remembering that one as well. And then on the COVID recovery, a couple of points that were brought up, let's get kids back to school, for the kids themselves, for the parents, get more STEM education for women. We all have to be digital now, so we need more training packages to help us be more digital. Grants for home offices, I think, was an amazing recommendation as well. I think we talked about a lot about upscaling and training, and the really important part of really understanding our data, and seeing where we are now and where we need to get to. And yeah, there's probably a ton more that we covered as well, but I just want to thank you so much. I think this has been really, really useful, and I hope the audience has found it really helpful as well, for everyone who's listening. And Liv, do you want to say a few words before we close out?
Just to echo everyone's words, actually, Jude summed it up brilliantly, and I took very similar notes. So really, really insightful. Thanks everyone for your incredible contributions, and happy to connect with anyone after the call as well. But what actually the only one thing I would add is just on the network. So I think it's invaluable to build your own personal networks and reach out to your to other peers, because it's an incredible network. And then after that, build your client base and learn from others, as well as your own mistakes to keep building, and have no fear.
Brilliant, thanks Liv. So thank you everyone, and I hope everyone watching has enjoyed, and yeah, we'll wrap up for now. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.